present data analytics and data visualization.
For those who don't know, to follow us, I think the best way, or the easiest way I should say, is literally through this site right here. It's literally just usergroups.tableau.com/Charlotte. You can find us on Google. I don't think it's hard. Like if you did a Google search for Charlotte Tableau User Group, either this is going to come up or the old page is going to come up. Both of these are active. There's no, you can use either one. I keep both of them up to date. There's no, you can get to both from, like, if you click here on this little event thing here, it just takes you to this page. This is really where you're going to find information about upcoming meetings. The other one is more of a, kind of like a forum. The other one's really for you guys. This site, technically, you can actually leave comments and kind of, put job postings, things of that nature. So we do use both, but for meeting purposes, like if you want to know when the next meeting is and things of that nature, again, I'll be honest with you, this site will get updated before this one will, but I try to keep them both kind of, up to date as possible. So either or. This URL is kind of funky, but not really. It's community.tableau.com/groups/Charlotte-CTUG. And the other one, the more simpler one, is just usergroups.tableau.com/Charlotte. Again, if you just do a Google search for Charlotte Tableau User Group, one of these two sites is going to come up. So either way, you should be fine. Next month, if you don't come to too many meetings, next month is the meeting to come to. The Big Book of Dashboards, this was written by Andy Kotzky, Jeffrey Schaefer, and Steve Wexler. I think they're all Zen Masters, right? Steve Wexler is going to be in Charlotte next month, and he's coming to do our Tableau user group before. He's actually doing his own private session, which you can sign up for if you want. We have the links for that as well. But yeah, if there was a user group meeting to come to, we don't get Zen Masters that come to Charlotte that often. So when they do, that's one of the ones you want to come to, because even we're going to learn. I'm going to be there with a pen and paper writing stuff down, like, yeah, this is good stuff. So trust me, I cannot compete with people who write books on Tableau. So if you want to go to a good one, come next month. Next month, it's already posted, just so you know. We do encourage you to sign up so we can get a kind of a count, of kind of who's coming. But next month, again, it is Steve Wexler. It's going to be at the Wells Fargo in Uptown Charlotte. We have access to an auditorium up there. So, and it is, again, the information is actually out there on our site right now. So, at some point, sign up for it. It's a good opportunity to get in front of someone who can answer way more questions than I could. Just so you know. Okay. Other than that, I guess we could jump right into it. Outside of me and Deanna, did anyone go to Tableau conference this year? Anyone go? Okay. All right. So we got a few. Did you guys enjoy it? Mm-hmm. All right. I mean, because this is a good opportunity for someone that's not me, William, or Jeremy to kind of. Did you think it was worth it to the other people in the room? Would you tell them to go to conference? I would. I think it is a valuable opportunity, but I'm biased. So, I mean, it's at the end. What did you think? Would you recommend it to someone who might be a beginner or just kind of getting their feet wet?
Yeah. That was my first conference, and it was very inspiring, watching that develop and a lot of ideas, previous contacts, so yeah.
Okay. Is anyone else that wants to say something about conference? That this is our first meeting since. There's a lot of good stuff. It is. I think it put it this way. Good. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, and I like 20,000 or something like that. Yeah, it's as many as it is. I'm not gonna say it's not overcrowded, but it doesn't feel overcrowded. And it's a who's who. I mean, everyone that you would ever want to ask a question about anything beyond even Tableau, like data analytics in general, BI, they're there. Like that's the real you. And this is my advice to everyone. If you don't go, that's fine, because this is my first conference, and I've been doing this for like 3-4 years. If you don't go, watch the videos. What they post after the fact, I mean, it isn't the same as being there, but let me tell you, it's a heck of a lot better than you're getting a lot of stuff for free that, is very valuable. So I would definitely encourage you to take advantage. All those videos I think are already posted. They posted like a month after. And you can just pick and choose which ones you want to watch. If you want to see how Cope uses Tableau, watch that video. But like when you sit in some of the more intense ones, the ones where they're talking about how to do this and how to do that and this, that, and the third, those are really, really valuable and really important. And again, they're free. So even if you don't go, if you never go, those videos, they help me. I'm not going to lie to you. Watch the Tableau conference videos after they get published. They're really, really valuable. And they're on Tableau's site. You can find links to them. They're on YouTube, matter of fact. I think you can just do searches for them like that.
Do they have just a Tableau YouTube page now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And most of the presenters have their own stuff on YouTube now as well. So like I said, most of those Zen masters and people who are presenting at that level, they record themselves and then they post the stuff kind of for their own content. They kind of go on tour and they do like, speaking arrangements and stuff like that. But like I said, it's valuable information. It really is.
Speaking of YouTube pages, our own Rashid has put together the Charlotte Tableau User Group YouTube page. So he's done, not only is he grabbing all the data, he's doing the production, and he's done all the graphic design for it. So I think this is a beautiful page that he put together for us. And the opening splash screen, I love the opening splash screen.
I'll be honest, I'm just trying to keep up with what the others are doing. Because like I said, they're getting sophisticated in kind of how they're presenting this information so people can learn going forward. And I think these are real useful opportunities. I mean, I'll be honest with you, we're trying to make it so you don't have to come to every one of these. Maybe you've got prior arrangements, maybe you got to pick up kids, maybe you can't make it to tonight's session, but you really want to see what we talked about. I'll do my best to kind of keep these things recorded and have them out there so that no matter what the session is, you got a chance to kind of take a look at it. And some of this is kind of stuff we did last year. Especially if you're a beginner, take a look at some of the stuff we did. We got tips and tricks. We got a whole bunch of stuff that we did last year that, we probably won't recover again in the near future, but it's out there. We'll recover it at some point, go over it again. But it's just always good to have that kind of as a reference, to kind of fall back on.
Take it away?
Yeah. All right. So, good news is that was about 5 minutes of intros, and now we can kind of get into the meat and bones of it. Okay. Who here is actually like a beginner? And when I say a beginner, you haven't used Tableau at all, or you've been using it for less than 6 months. Okay. Who here has been, I got a handful. Who here has been using it for like a year? All right. Who here has been using it for more than a year? All right. So, you guys really aren't beginners, but the good news is some of this stuff might be kind of, repetitive, stuff you already know, but some of it might come in handy. And so I'll try to kind of go a little bit deeper than just the basics, but I do want to kind of cover some basics too, just to make sure everybody kind of gets the same, overall, I guess, value. All right, so today's discussion is really going to be about just layout containers. So I'm not going to teach you about dimensions and measures. I'm not going to teach you how to build a worksheet or any of that nature. But even if you don't know how to do those things, even if you haven't ever used Tableau before, segue, if you've never used Tableau before, or you don't know what I'm talking about, I still to this day think the most important thing to learn is dimensions and measures. Dimensions, measures, discrete values, and continuous values. Everything in Tableau in some way is driven by those 4 things. If there was 4 things you really want to learn, it's those 4 things. But once you get past those things, you kind of get into some of the design stuff and the aesthetics and things of that nature. So in line with that, I want to kind of talk about layout containers. And really what we're going to do today is talk about this screen here. This screen here is kind of based on the idea that you already have some kind of worksheet, some kind of visualization, something that you've already done, and now you're ready to basically build a dashboard. You're ready to kind of put the whole thing together in some kind of, visualization. So first thing out the gate, I know it's kind of hard to see on the left side, so I'll try to see if I can squeeze this in so you can see it better. But really I want to talk about what's on that left pane there, basically everything over here. And the first thing I want to talk about is this size selection. Good question. I believe I am on the most current version, which is like 2019.2 or 0.4 or whatever it is. I'm not going to cover anything that's 2019 specific, because I know some of you guys who work for banks and things of that nature, you're still on 2018. Some of you might be on like 10.4, 10.2. That's sad. But the good news is I'm not going to cover even 10.4, even 10.4. You'll be good. I'm not talking about extensions or any of those things down there that are all new, and we're not going there. We're just talking about layout containers. Beauty of that is they haven't changed much. They really haven't. So even though this might look a little different, the fundamental concepts behind layout containers still remain the same. So the first thing out the gate on any dashboard is the dashboard size itself. And really what I want to talk about real quick is this concept of size, in that you have three choices when you're talking about the size of a dashboard. You have a choice of fixed, automatic, or range. Fixed is pretty much what it sounds like. When you do fixed, it's basically going to say you're going to draw a box or a rectangle, or however you want to think of it, that's literally going to be a certain amount of pixels wide and a certain amount of pixels high. I mean, I'll show you some of these default ones. This one's 800 by 600. This one's, let's say, 1024 by 768. And let me just put something in there, so cause I'm not sure, like you said, how clean this looks just kind of off the bat. So maybe just kind of do something. And that's it. So let's just throw a box in there. Let's just make that box a certain color. Okay, so we've got us a nice little black box here. And the size of the box is the size of the dashboard. The dashboard's 1024 by 768. Again, you can kind of change, the size, but basically whatever size you choose, it is truly just that. It is a fixed size. It is literally going to be just that size. The dashboard is never going to be any bigger or any smaller, no matter what kind of device you're looking at. Sidebar, my opinion, I do everything fixed. I don't mess with automatic or range, but I'll tell you about them just so you have an idea of whether or not you want to use them. I encourage people to use fixed, and I use fixed only if you know you're in a scenario where the dashboard should stay the same size no matter what. This is not taking into account of mobile or tablet. If you're building for mobile or tablet, you can use the actual mobile or tablet kind of device layouts, or you can do automatic, but fixed probably won't work for you. That is a scenario where, I would say don't use fixed. But if you're building for someone who's going to be looking at your dashboards on a computer, in my opinion, fixed is probably the best or safest way to go. And here's kind of why. I'm going to explain why by showing you the alternatives. Basically, if you were to choose automatic as your size, meaning that it's not going to be fixed anymore, it's just going to be automatic, the box literally becomes the size of the screen. So no matter what kind of screen you're looking at, it's going to take up the most kind of available space that it can. So if I were to resize the window, the box is going to keep resizing no matter what. The box will always take up as much space as it can on the screen. The problem with this is that, number one, it's a negative on performance because Tableau kind of has to figure that out every time the dashboard loads up. And number two, you might be in a scenario where you don't necessarily want your visualization to be massive on a 4K monitor, but kind of like sometimes it can grow to be too big or it can kind of shrink to be too small. So that's why I would say stay away from automatic. Range is a scenario where if you don't understand the concept, it's basically saying it's a combination of both. Instead of being fixed or automatic, you're kind of saying I want fixed and automatic. So what range does is it allows you to kind of set, let's say, the minimum size of the box and the maximum size of the box. So I'm going to say the minimum size of the box in this scenario is going to be 500 by, let's say 500, and I'll say the max size is going to be 800 by 800. So what I'm now doing with this range selection, the box will never be bigger than 800 by 800. The box will never be smaller than 500 by 500. But in the middle, it will, if you notice, it's like it will grow to a certain point and then it stops growing. And that's kind of what range is saying. It's saying that somewhere in here, I'll keep growing or shrinking depending on the resolution, but I'll never get any bigger than that, and I'll never get any smaller than kind of wherever the cutoff is. So right now, once you see the scroll bars, that would be the cutoff for the small size. Range is one of those kind of, it's a use case scenario. There might be a legitimate time to use it. I can think of a few, but you better kind of know that going in. Some of these tools can be somewhat dangerous if you're not really comfortable with kind of how you're building, because you really need to know what is the max size. What do I never want it to get any bigger than this, or I never want it to get any smaller than that. And sometimes the cons outweigh the pros. But at the end of the day, most of the time when you're building something that someone's going to look at on a computer, fixed works fine, you know, depending on kind of what you're looking at. Because what I do want to emphasize is that not all browsers are built the same. The way it looks in Internet Explorer could be different than the way it looks in Edge, could be different than the way it looks in Chrome, could be different than the way it looks in Firefox. Fixed, you don't really got to worry about that because it's the same size no matter what. You get into some of these other things, it can get a little tricky. So, any questions, comments around Good question. What I try to do in that scenario, because that's a legitimate scenario, you will have people who have a laptop and then they have, like, you know, let's say a docking station and they look at two monitors, and then you have people who just never leave the laptop. Then you got people who got desktops. And technically their resolution can and is different. You try to find something in the middle. Typically, I'll build dashboards that are like, I want to say 16 by 9. And what that is, I want you to think of like, you know, that's almost like television kind of like, you know, dimensions, in that what it's doing, it's basically saying that 1600 pixels wide and 900 pixels high is like that standard widescreen 16 by 9, like when you choose your input on your television. It's typically going to give you a box that's usually going to be viable or acceptable. Now, somebody's looking at it on an old laptop that they bought from Walmart, yes, they're going to have scroll bars. But scroll bars aren't necessarily the worst thing in the world. You know, the dashboard is still the same size. It's just for me, I open it up, I get no scroll bars, the whole thing fits nice and neat. For them, they might have some horizontals and vertical scroll bars, but most importantly, both scenarios can see all of the data. What you don't want to have happen with automatic and range is the dashboard is going to start condensing or getting bigger. And what happens is if it tries to condense, text gets smaller, things move together. What was now nice, you know, when it was properly spaced, where this was at least this far away from something else, now it's way too close. Only on my screen, not on your screen. That's why I said you'll run into that kind of stuff when you start messing around with automatic and range. And that's not to say don't use them, it's just to be conscientious of that. You're introducing that in, so you kind of gotta, you might have to have like a working group with a bunch of people with different resolutions, and each one of them tells you what looks good and what doesn't, and I've done that before too. But like I said, fixed, to me, the only downside is that yes, some people may have to scroll where others don't. Some people might say, hey, it's just at the bottom of the screen. And they're like, what do you mean? I don't see it. Do I have to scroll down? Oh, you have scroll bars? I don't have scroll bars. That kind of stuff does and can and will happen. But to me, I still think fixed over, it kind of wins out over the other ones, unless it's a very specific use case scenario. And to me, yes, tablet and mobile are very specific use case scenarios where, to me, you want to design to tablet and mobile. I'm a big proponent of there should be a mobile version of your dashboard and then a regular version of your dashboard. Can you make one dashboard that grows and shrinks? Yes. And there are some good examples of that. So, like I said, it could be a case-by-case scenario. But I do agree that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. You should know how to use automatic and range, because one day they might come in handy. Nothing's ever 100%, but 98% of the time I use fixed. So, good question. Any other questions around just the concept of the overall size of a dashboard? Okay. The good news is once you kind of get past that, you get into everyone's favorite discussion, which is tiled versus floating. For those who don't know, tiled versus floating is like saying Apple versus Android. You could start a fight with this because you can make an argument either way. Let me just explain the differences between the two. Fundamentally, tiled is the idea of building a dashboard almost to a grid. You know, if you kind of want to think of it that way. Right now, this dashboard is tiled, so I want to kind of show you basically what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take out my little box here, and I'm just going to start double-clicking on worksheets. It's 100% tile, I'm not floating anything. So I click on chart number 1, I click on chart number 1A, I click on chart number 2, I click on chart number 3. That just built a 4-blocker in 10 seconds. I could have floated this, and it would not have taken 10 seconds. And I probably wouldn't have got the alignment perfectly unless I really went in and said, put this at X and put this at Y and so on and so forth. So there's a legitimate case for tile. Even I will admit that. Do I use tile? I use tile inside of floating, but I rarely ever use tile as is the way you're seeing it. And it's only because for me, I have what I call different use case scenarios. Again, you should always design to a grid. And what I mean by that is I'm actually going to show you another dashboard. This one, I believe, was built by Andy Kotsky. Typically, dashboards, in my opinion, should look like this. They should have this kind of flow where, you know, you can kind of scroll down and see kind of the story as it's kind of articulated. So to me, this is a very good example of a very good dashboard. This is 100% tile. The only thing I think is floating on this dashboard might be a few, that legend I think is floating, and I think that might be, maybe this thing is floating. Everything else is tile. It's a glorified grid. You insert something, and then you insert something to the left or the right, and then maybe something beneath it or above it. That fundamentally is the concept of tile. So what is floating? Basically the polar opposite. If tiled is this idea of drawing a grid, floating is more like PowerPoint. You can put things wherever you want to put them. You can put them in the top left, put them in the top right, but you can also put things in front or behind each other. The best way to think of this is like panes of glass. You can put something in front of something else, and it can be see-through, meaning that you can have something that's literally in front of something else or behind something else. I mean, that legend's actually a good example of what I mean, in that technically, the reason that this thing here is floating is because it's on top of the bar chart. Technically, the bar chart is there, and then this little box is kind of floating in front of it. You could not do this with tiles. You can't put that legend where it is, because tiled will put it like literally to the left or to the right or above or beneath. But floating allows you to kind of come off of that grid and just like literally just float it wherever you want to. There's a legitimate use case for both of them. I'm a big proponent in using both of them. That's why I say I think you get the most value just like this when you use both of them. I would never recommend it be 100% one or the other, but like everything, there's use case scenarios. Before I go any further, does anyone have any questions about this concept of floating versus tile? Because this is kind of when you get into building dashboards, this is, I'm not gonna say a big deal, but kind of like more of a big thing. So again, if the key takeaways, you know, there's some benefits to tile layouts, but to me, the most obvious benefit is, like I said, the ease and simplicity of building a grid. You can build your grid very quickly, very easily, put things where you want them, nice and neat. Floating, again, is this concept of being able to take things and put them in front, behind. You can size them however you want. Think of PowerPoint. You can literally take something, make it as big as you want, make it as small as you want, put it wherever you want. Can't do that with tiles. You can do that with floating. But fundamentally, beyond that, that's kind of where they both kind of go two separate, you know, ways, I guess you could say. Don't worry, I'm going to get into kind of the cons of tiles and kind of what turns people off from tiles and kind of all of the trickiness that happens. But just on the overall concepts, any questions? Anyone kind of, you know, unclear about the concept of tiles versus floating? Anyone have any experience they want to share? You know, maybe as far as their preferences or anything like that? All right, so then let's kind of get into some of what I call the fun nitty-gritty stuff, which is basically to say, let's get into the concept of layout containers, because that's really what we're here to talk about. So we understand automatic versus fixed versus range, and now we understand tile versus floating. So first of all, what are layout containers? Well, layout containers are really just what you see here, this horizontal and this vertical option, and technically tiled is a layout container as well. And hang on, I'll show you what I mean when I say that tiled is a layout container. If you're new to Tableau, or even if you're not new to Tableau, I can't stress to you enough the importance of one part of this screen that you can almost live and die by, and that's this layout tab up here. You want to always be conscious of this layout tab and kind of what you see down here at the bottom. Right now, there's nothing in there. So let's bring in a worksheet, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to bring in chart 1A. And now, as you can see, when I double-clicked on that, it created this tiled box, and inside of this tiled box is chart 1, I should say. So tiled, as I've got it selected there, think of that like that's the dashboard itself. That, remember we did a fixed size, and it was like 800 by 800, that's what the tile is. That's the box itself. That's everything in the dashboard. Right now, the only thing in the dashboard is chart number 1. To show you what I mean, I'm going to double click on chart 1A. And now when we, actually that's not a good example. Let me bring something else in to kind of show you. So I'll bring in just a blank box and I'll put it right here. And now when I go to layout, you'll see in tile, now I have it. It's it's kind of like a glorified, I forget what the word is, but you get what I'm saying. It's inside of tile is chart one and that blank box. So both of those things are inside the tiled container. So I want you to understand that tile as it is there, this is what I'm talking about when I say tiled, is actually a container as well. Tiled is a container, horizontal is a container, vertical is a container. So we understand what tiled is. So what is horizontal and vertical? Same principle, just literally a separate box to both ultimately do the same thing. So just kind of like I did with tiled, I'm going to drag a horizontal into here. And even though you don't see anything, it's actually there. Let me show you. I'm going to give it a background color so you can at least see it. So that right there is actually the horizontal. That is the tiled box, and inside of the tiled box is a horizontal. You can't really tell because the horizontal is taking up the size of the entire box because we're in a tiled format. But think of it like there's a container, and then there's another container in that container. Best way to describe it. So a horizontal is just what it sounds like. It's literally the ability to put two things side by side. I'm going to put, oh, I'm sorry, did we have a question?
I just want to, can you just win a little bit? I can leave like a quarter of an inch on the left side.
Yeah, can I? It's a good question. I mean, I can, yeah, let me just do that. Yeah, it's kind of like a weird left line there. So let me know how close I can get before I'm at the edge. Okay, sorry about that. No problem. Okay, all right, so we've got our horizontal, and basically, like I said, right now there's nothing inside of it. I'm gonna basically take the text box, we'll put that in there. I'm just gonna type some stuff. And then I'm gonna take, let's say, another blank thing and put that inside. So, right now, if I did that correctly, as you can see, we have our tiled container, we have a horizontal, and inside the horizontal, we have text on the left and a blank box on the right. So the text on the left and the blank box on the right are all inside of the horizontal. Horizontal is just as it sounds. You can put sheets, images, text, anything you want in a horizontal, and they will just kind of basically always be side by side. That's what a horizontal does. Vertical does the same thing, except you can just kind of stack things up and down. So fundamentally, that is, layout containers. Where it gets tricky, like I said, is kind of some of the default Tableau behavior. So this is good for everyone, not just beginners, because now I'm going to kind of get into kind of the why Tableau does what it does and what to be conscious of, and kind of, I'm not going to say to avoid it, because to a certain extent you really can't avoid some of this stuff, but trust me, this is one of those things that's important to know. So how Tableau treats a worksheet changes if that worksheet has either something that is, let's say, a filter, or let's say something like a legend, or let's say something like a parameter, or something of that nature. So let me kind of show you what I mean by that. Same principle as before. I'm going to bring in chart number 1, and I'm going to bring in chart number 1A. These are just two bar charts side by side, nothing special. So when I go to layout and I look at tiled, I should see just two sheets, basically exactly the way you expect to see it. Now I want to show you something else. I want you to watch what happens. I'm going to take out chart 1A. I'm going to leave chart 1 in there, and that's fine. We'll just kind of keep that the way it is. I'm going to duplicate this just so I can have both up at the same time. Get rid of this. And then I'm going to go back to chart 1A, the orange one. And you know what? I am going to put, let's say, airport name on color. I don't even know if that's a good thing to do, but who cares? The reason I did that, this is chart 1. I want you to look at the hierarchy. Tiled, chart 1, just by itself. Now this is our blank duplicate. I'm going to do nothing more than double click on 1A. Same thing. It brought out the bar chart, and then it gives me a nice little legend right next to it. Now, how many objects do you think are in this dashboard? Who says 2? Anyone say something higher? How about like 6? Let's take a look. We've got a tile, we've got a horizontal, we've got another tile, we've got chart 1A, and we've got a vertical, and we've got our filter. Tableau default behavior. this thing will kill you. And it'll kill you 100 times because I didn't do anything. There's nothing different between dashboard, this one, and this one, except the fact that I threw one dimension on color. That's all I did. And it created all that, I'm not gonna say crap, but all that stuff over there. It gets even better because fundamentally, do you need all of these things that Tableau created? Not really. Watch. I don't know why Tableau created this horizontal, but what happens if I try to get rid of it? Gone. Dashboard looks exactly the same. That was a useless container. This is what happens when you use tile. I don't want to make you fearful of using tile, but tile is notorious for doing this. The infamous useless container. It's a container in your dashboard that has nothing in it. You don't know how it got there. You're like, why are there all these empty boxes? And it's just, let me show you the dashboard built by Andy Kotsky, the one we were looking at earlier, our beautiful example. This is I think, matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, he's one of the writers of the book. Andy Kotsky was actually one of the masters that wrote this thing. This is a perfect dashboard. I shouldn't say perfect, but to me, this is a very, very good dashboard. Visually, it does what it's supposed to do, does a good job of articulating the story, and I don't see anything wrong with it. And I don't think there is anything wrong with it. But let's just take a look at, the layout side, because this is, again, it's 100% tile. I think the only thing that was floating was, yes, method, which I believe, let's find out what that is. Okay, that's that little box right there is floating, and execution. So these are the only two things that are floating. Everything else is tile. Let's start counting. I'm going to open up this height. And we've got a horizontal. And another horizontal. And another. And another. And another. And we keep going. And keep going. And eventually, I'm going to find some information. And when I say this, I'm kind of saying this half jokingly. Andy Kotsky did not do something wrong. He didn't build a bunch of unnecessary horizontal boxes. Tableau just does this by default. I can start getting rid of some of these horizontals, and I don't think it's going to affect the view at all, meaning that they're just empty boxes. This is important because even though it doesn't seem like it's a big deal now, those empty boxes can wreak havoc on your dashboard if you don't know they're there, and they can interfere with things sometimes that you don't realize they're interfering with. They're just empty, useless containers that, again, Tableau does throw in there. It's some default behavior. I don't even know if it's a defect. People have called it out before. It's just what Tableau does when you use tiles. When you just kind of use tile and you bring things in. The thing I was able to really kind of deduce is that, yes, it does seem to be 100% driven by these concept of there has to be something in your dashboard, something in your worksheet that is, I guess I'd say, more than just, think of it this way, a filter, a parameter that's showing, or a legend. Those three things are the first that come to mind of what Tableau will take and throw in a separate container. If you have a dashboard that has a parameter or a filter or a legend, Tableau does this automatically. It'll create a vertical and it'll just throw those things in there. And when it does that, you get the extra vertical per se, and the vertical is not really the problem here. The vertical actually is, housing the legend. So fundamentally, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. If I had another filter or parameter that I threw on this, I might want to throw it in that vertical so it shows up kind of underneath here, like in this nice little narrow box. But the fact that it created another tiled container and it created a horizontal container for that tile container, this is kind of when you get into some of these unnecessary containers. I can't sit there and tell you honestly that you need multiple tiled containers or that horizontal container. I get why it's there. It's there because Tableau created the vertical container and then said, well, I got to put these two things side by side, so I've got to create a horizontal to do that. But to me, I wish Tableau wouldn't do this in such a confusing manner. Because like I said, I didn't even realize what was causing this until recently. Literally, when we scheduled this and I started really examining, trying to figure out why Tableau does certain things, it took me a while to deduce that it is the parameter and the filter and the legend that do it. But I say this to say, if you're 100% tiled, kind of like Andy was, it may not be that big of a deal. If you're 100% floating, you won't have this problem. You're going to control every container that you put in your dashboard. You control everything that you put in your dashboard. If you use a combination of both, it can be a nightmare sometimes. And my advice is to use a combination of both. Tableau is at its most powerful when you use a combination of both. And I'll show you kind of what I mean by a combination of both. But I want you to be mindful of this, because if there's a tip or a trick or a lesson in today's session, it's that you understand what I call the useless container. If your container isn't doing anything, to me, it's useless. Meaning that this container, I think technically, it's kind of not, because this tile thing, you know, we have two tiles, but the vertical container, if I just remove the vertical container, now I believe this should be floating. See, this is where I say it can kind of get tricky. Some of these things, I always say, play around with containers. When you have containers, try to get rid of it. If your dashboard changes, then you'll know it's an important container. Otherwise, you know, it's kind of that. I don't want you to be surprised by the idea that you see useless containers in your dashboard, because Tableau creates useless containers. Like it's a thing. It's going to happen. Is there any harm in leaving them out there? No. I mean, if you're fine with it, if it's not interfering with your dashboard, kind of like with Andy's dashboard, it works the same. All of those useless containers aren't really harming Andy. I mean, at the end of the day, it might be a slight performance, but for the most part, it's not really a big deal for him, because it doesn't really interfere with his dashboard. Where it could get tricky is if, like I said, if you were using a combination of floating and tile.
So where do you use this container here? It's the tile workflow is going to force you to put that where that tile is, you can use that space.
Well, you asked where the useless container is. Do you see on the left side how many horizontals there are? I'm going to remove one of them, just at random. I'm just picking one. I'm just going to say remove container. Did you see anything in the dashboard change? Did the dashboard look like I did something in a negative way? Like, did I lose something by removing that container? What was it doing? If I didn't lose anything, what value was it adding? I mean, it kind of goes that. Go ahead. Yeah.
I know that in this, you put in a bunch of thin gray lines to separate this panel. Every time you did that, you do a horizontal.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, that's actually, you know, I can show you exactly what that is. In that I could create a horizontal right now, and we'll stick with this tile concept, and I'll put it right there. And let's see, I will change the background. Make that, let's see, like black, and then we will adjust the size. And that's not really pretty, but I mean, you get the idea. Like that horizontal actually, yes, I agree. I can make it thinner and then it would be aligned, but I want you to notice where that horizontal is in the hierarchy. That horizontal is in the vertical. The vertical is basically what everything is in. If you look at this vertical, this is kind of where all of the sheets and the text box and everything is basically living in this vertical here. That's kind of where all the bread and butter is. These horizontals above it, they're, in my opinion, unnecessary. Because the vertical is basically, like right now the vertical is selected, so you can see by the blue line, that's everything. In the horizontal right above it, I could put something to the left or right to show you that that horizontal probably works fine, but Andy didn't put anything to the left or right. So again, it kind of goes back to that, you know, what truly is the value. Yeah, I'm not sure where that blank box got put in, because it's kind of hard to select the right. I guess what I was trying to say is I can put a blank box to the right of one of these horizontals if I can find it to be able to select it. But because Andy didn't have anything to the left or right of the vertical, what was the use of all of the extra horizontals?
So he was building not the defender, but he was building a long form.
Yep.
For he was careful to fix the height of every container he put in.
I don't think necessarily that these things are necessarily a fixed height.
Remove that horizontal, you lose that fixed characteristic.
No, watch. I'm going to show you. I think I can remove literally. See how all these horizontals here? I don't know if I guess. Let me make this bigger because that is kind of tight. Okay, so you can see all of the horizontals, right? I think I can remove almost every. I can't remove this vertical or anything beneath it because that's the bread and butter. But every horizontal you see above it, let's just keep going. I'll remove that one. Sorry.
How can you tell what's bread and butter and what's useless?
Good question. I can tell what's bread and butter because as I'm looking, this is what I mean, that this hierarchy is golden. If you look at the vertical, I'm starting to see things in the vertical that I believe are similar to what's on the screen. Like, you know, I'm seeing execution by, say, and you can click on any of these things kind of, and it'll select basically what it is that, you know. So just by looking at this vertical, I'm seeing there's a lot of stuff inside of it that looks legit. Like that to me is telling me that that vertical is legit. But the things above it, there's nothing, see, I would expect, like for this horizontal, I'll close the vertical. This horizontal, the last one, inside of it is a vertical. But it's a horizontal, so the vertical could be on the left, and then something else could be on the right of the horizontal. And that would be the case for virtually all of these horizontals, because that's the point of a horizontal, to say that you can put something to the left or right of an object. The vertical in this scenario is just an object, meaning that no different than putting a worksheet or a blank box. It's something that's inside the horizontal. This gets tricky because it's this concept of a container in a container in a container. It's like Inception. Like, you know, it's kind of hard to, you know, it's like Tupperware. You've got a Tupperware thing inside another Tupperware thing, inside another Tupperware thing. And they can all hold something. So that's kind of what I mean by this concept of the extra horizontals to me are unnecessary Tupperware pieces. You've got a salad container and you put the lid on the salad container and you sealed it, and then you put that container in another container, and then another container, and then another container. Like, you didn't need those extra containers. You already had one and it was already sealed. Yeah.
So can you have containers inside containers in a tile environment, or is that a floating environment?
Oh, you can have containers inside of containers in either one. Yes, and this is where it gets tricky. So let's, any other questions around this? Because I want to kind of show you the concept of using both. Because there is a fundamental question of, if these containers are so confusing and this, that, and the third, why don't I just put things on the screen where I want them to be and not use these containers? What value was a container to begin with? Like, I'll show you what I mean by that. In that, fundamentally, you might say, and to a certain extent, you would be right to say this. I'm going to go back to my chart 1A, and I'm going to remove that thing off of the airport name. So it's just a bar chart, so there's no more weird behavior. Now, let's look at the dashboard, and I'm going to double-click on chart 1 and double-click on chart 1A. It's tiles. It just basically brought those two things in. There's no containers here. I mean, there's no horizontals or verticals. It's just two things next to each other in a tiled container.
There are two containers?
There's only one container here. There's only one. The only container. Always a container. You'll know if it's a container whether it has a hierarchy. If you can collapse it or expand it, it's a container. Does that make sense? Like these. Oh, the arrow right here. Good question. If you see this arrow, that means it's something that's a container. It could have something inside it. It could be expanded or it could be collapsed. If you don't see that little arrow there, it is not a container. Like, you know, if I expand this, chart number 1 is not a container. It's a worksheet. Chart number 1A, again, it's a worksheet. It's only a container if you can be expanded or collapsed. Good question. Okay, so the fundamental question here is going to be, you have worksheet 1 and worksheet 2. They're right next to each other in a tiled container. Now, to me, the real question is there any difference between this and, I just duplicated it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these out. This time, I'm going to put a horizontal in there, and then I'm going to put both of those things in there right next to each other in the horizontal. So I'm going to say chart 1, and then I'm going to say chart 1. And if we look at the layout, we should see that. We should see, now, you see what I mean? The extra arrows, you have a container in a container. You have a horizontal, and that has an expand and collapse. And inside the horizontal is chart 1 and chart 1A. And then inside the tiled container is the horizontal. So this is a container in a container. Now, the question is there any difference between what I'm showing here and what I'm showing here? Other than the fact that the containers, you know, and like I said, there might have been an alignment type of issue. Fundamentally, you're looking at the same thing, right? And the answer is yes, you are looking at the same thing. So why would I use a horizontal to begin with? I can achieve the same effect just by putting the things side by side. When you put something side by side, I think the best way to describe this is going to be when you get into some of the dashboard actions. Meaning that a dashboard action, let me just show you. You know, we're going to use a filter action. I'm going to create a dashboard action here. And what I'm going to say is, I want, when someone chooses something on, I don't know if this is going to be a good example, but let's say if someone chooses something on chart 1A, I want the dashboard to filter chart, let's say chart 1 by whatever they select. And this might not make sense as I'm talking about it, but I think you'll understand when we start messing with it. So now, if I click on Delta, the dashboard on the left just filtered to just Delta, meaning that, and then now it basically shows the selection when I choose something in chart 1A, and then it erases everything when I remove the selection. So if I choose Sky West, you'll see that's kind of the results for just SkyWest and so on and so forth. And you get the idea. Basically, chart 1A is filtering chart 1, meaning chart 1A is like a glorified filter. And what I'm going to do, just to make this consistent, I'm going to hide the titles. So I'm going to hide the title on this one and hide the title on this one. And we get the exact same behavior even with the titles hidden. I click on one, basically you get to see kind of the results on the other side. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the other one, but behavior might be a little bit different now. Actually, I think I have to delete that action for 1 second and then just recreate it. So let me do that. Make sure that hey, come on in. You haven't missed anything, don't worry, you can. Okay, so now that was the example when I was tiled. I don't want to say no containers, no horizontals or no verticals, just tiled. The other example, the other version of this is same two worksheets, but both of them inside a horizontal. Now, I'm going to build that same dashboard action, and I want to show you kind of how it's going to be different. So I'm going to say filter. Again, someone chooses something on chart 1A, it's going to filter chart 1, and basically hide when nothing's selected. So we'll do that. And say OK, OK, and just to be consistent, I'm going to hide titles. Now, I'm going to choose delta. And it filters just the way it's supposed to. Now I'm going to click delta again, and look what happened. It's not gone. It's the horizontal. The horizontal is now acting in a way to do this. And the reason that this is happening on one version and not the other is kind of as simple as it sounds. On this version, I know it's not showing. The box is kind of hidden right now. But the difference between the two, there's a box on the left and a box on the right. And I want you to think of it in terms of that fixed kind of, concept. The box on the left is just on the left. It's literally there. The box on the right is on the right. It's literally there. The fact that you're clicking things and things are showing and hiding doesn't change the fact that there's two boxes. They're just there. Either you see something in one or you don't see something on the other. They're there. The horizontal is actually not necessarily the same. There's one horizontal, and inside the horizontal are two worksheets. But fundamentally, what's showing is the horizontal. If there's nothing to show in one of those worksheets, the other worksheet expands to the entire size of the horizontal. And that's what the kind of behavior you can get with horizontals and verticals that you can't get without. This is why you do want to use horizontals and verticals, and you do want to use fixed, because again, you can't do this floating. What I can do, I can float the entire horizontal box itself, but the concept of what's happening inside the box still remains the same. And I'll show you, because I think I can even do this. I can take the whole box and now make the box floating and put the box wherever I want. But make no mistake, even though the box is floating, when I say the box, I'm talking about the horizontal. Right now, that box is the horizontal. That's what I've moved and kind of altered. It's the horizontal itself. Inside that horizontal are two tiled worksheets, two fixed worksheets. Those worksheets inside of that actually aren't necessarily floating. They are tiled. And you can even, I think I can show that to say that, actually I thought I could, but I'm gonna see if there's a way I can do that. Okay, that right there is with the horizontal selected, and notice there's a checkbox next to floating. If I actually select one of the worksheets inside, you should, actually that's the hidden one. If I select this guy, you should see he has no checkbox next to floating. He is not floating, he is tiled per se. So and again, and the behavior still works. If I click on something, you should see the, and like I said, what's happening is that it's going to contract and expand as much as it can within the constraints of the box. So the smaller you make the box, the tighter it gets, the bigger you make the box, the bigger it gets. But again, this is probably the most valuable aspect of layout containers, because with this, you have the ability to do a lot more than you would ever be able to do just floating objects or just using 100% tiled like a grid. Because to me, this is what I mean by the combination. I created the grid tiled concept, and then I floated the entire box. So now I can make this box, put it wherever I want and adjust the size accordingly and so on and so forth. This is what I mean by using that combination of floating and tile. In that, to me, this is where you get the most value, because before it was kind of too big. I don't need necessarily a dashboard that's that big that takes up the whole thing, but I might want to retain this type of behavior. Because again, these are just two worksheets that are next to each other in a horizontal. There's no limit. There could be 2 worksheets next to each other. There could be 22 worksheets next to each other. You could have 20 of them hide on an action and the other. There's no limit. You can get really, really sophisticated with kind of what you do with horizontals and verticals. But you just got to kind of understand that behavior. And this all goes back to really, like I said, understanding what you see right there on the left, that hierarchy. That hierarchy is like, that's your Bible. That's the thing that you want to live and die by. When you're having problems with dashboards, you can probably figure out when it's layout containers, 90% of what's going on just by exploring that. Because that's going to tell you exactly where every object is, and that's going to kind of give you a way to kind of delineate kind of exactly what you need to do and kind of how you